So I have with me Nicholas Brookes, who has written a book about cricket. Nicholas, what's the name of your book?
The name of the book is An Island's 11.
Okay. And what brought you to Sri Lanka?
So really, I grew up in the 1990s. I was born in 1990, so I was a child at the time when Sri Lanka were on top of the world in terms of cricket, right? The Arjuna, Aravinda, Jayasuriya, Murali, vast days when, as a boy from South London, there was something incredibly exciting about Sri Lankan cricket. And I had always assumed that Sri Lanka had always been a part of the furniture, right? And not just a small chair in the corner, they were the big sofa, the big coffee table at the heart of cricket. And so I was shocked when I found out that Test status only arrived in 1982 and that the whole history before that had been kind of overlooked, untold, and no one seemed to care. And I mean, I went to the library at Lord's and you know, they have an Australian section. It's 3 shelves, Indian section the same. And then I said, where are your books on Sri Lanka?
Non-existent.
It's like this.
Okay.
You know, a tiny little section, half of which was one book. And so I thought there was a real kind of a gap in the market, a story that needed to be told. And then I came here for the first time in 2017 and I absolutely fell in love with the place. My mum is half Jamaican, so I spent a lot of my childhood traveling there, and Sri Lanka, in terms of landscape, reminded me very much of Jamaica, the same kind of tropical, rugged, wild lushness. So I was instantly in love. I wanted to move here, and I think it felt like a very kind of vital, time-sensitive subject, because so many stories from Sri Lankan cricket have already been lost into the ether and disappeared. And I was very conscious that if I sat on this book and left it 5 years or 10 years, that more would fall by the wayside. So it felt like something that had to be done now. And I felt incredibly privileged to get the chance to tell those stories.
So you did mention that you are of mixed Jamaican parentage.
Yeah.
Why didn't you write a book about the cricketing history of the Caribbean then?
I think just because it seemed like very well-trodden ground. They've had a whole host of great cricket writers, from C.L.R. James to Michael Manley, and Sri Lanka just didn't seem to have quite the same literary tradition in terms of books about cricket. There wasn't really a canon, although there are some fantastic cricket writers, but in a different kind of way. I mean, you've got Shehan Karunatilaka, whose novel on cricket, Chinaman. I mean, I think that's a true masterpiece, not just in terms of cricket, but it really captures the soul of Sri Lanka. Andrew Fidel Fernando, who I'm talking to tomorrow, I think is one of the best cricket journalists in the world. But in terms of book writing, things were very limited. I mean, there are some old books, going back to S.P. Phonanda, who was dubbed the Wizard of the East, and more recently S.S. Pereira's produced a very exhaustive book. But they're told in a style that I would say is more chronicling than storytelling. They're not narrative driven. And I wanted this book to tell the human stories, which I think are always fascinating. And it's about the characters who've shaped the game. And I mean, coming from England where, you know, everyone knows cricket, but it's somewhat niche. Here it's really central to the fabric of Sri Lankan psyche, right? And it seems to me, as an outsider anyway, as one of the very few pan-national things that cuts across all these lines which divide Sri Lanka. And so the fact that it was so fundamental, I was just instantly drawn to it. And
what is your take on cricketers who have written books like Roshan Mahanama wrote a book, Retired Hurt?
Yeah, absolutely.
Murali wrote a book. What is your take on those books?
I think they're fantastic. I mean, for me, they were a fantastic help. Roshan's book, Aravinda's book, and Murali's unpublished manuscript, I was very kind to be allowed to use that as research materials. I think that it's a real shame that there aren't more. And, you know, I mean, in England, every cricketer has 2 biographies. Some of the guys who are still playing have already put out 2 books. And I think it's a real travesty, actually, that we don't have books from figures like Arjuna, from Sangakkara, that Murali still isn't published. I mean, Malinga's has an amazing story to tell. There are so many, and I think that really it's important for posterity, for cricket history, that these books are published and that we get these stories, because it would be a great shame if they were lost. And I think that Sri Lanka has, well, the history of cricket is so closely tied to colonialism,
Yes.
and the British did so much wrong here.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that they did, which was really criminal in terms of cricket, was to make Sri Lankan cricket feel inferior. And so I think for a long time people have felt that somehow the cricket on the island is less important than what happens in England and Australia, and I fundamentally disagree with that. And I think there's something about that still lingers. And
But is that the same case with countries like India, Pakistan, West Indies, who also have similar colonial histories?
I think it is to an extent, but nowhere has less long-form writing on it than Sri Lanka. Which, I mean, I don't think it's purely because of that. I think there's also something here about oral storytelling. That, I mean, everyone who I met interviewing this book was a wonderful storyteller, and they had a whole host of incredible stories to share. But they do it verbally, right?
Yeah.
They do it sitting over a plate of cuttlefish and a glass
Shot
of
of
beer.
arak.
Sure, a shot of arak if you're lucky.
Yeah.
But for some reason, that hasn't translated to a kind of literary canon. And I mean, I felt very limited actually by the scope and size of my project, although, I mean, you see my book and you could beat someone over the head with it, it's massive. But my first draft was twice as long. And I mean, I had so many wonderful stories that I wish that I could have told them all. And so I really see my book as a starting point for Sri Lankan cricket history, and I hope that it will inspire more people to look at it and to write about it, because it's such a unique, fascinating history.
How long did you spend in terms of research?
So I think I probably started researching the book in 2017. And then I moved here in April 2018. I lived here for 2 years, just until COVID struck, pretty much. And then I went back to the book and I submitted it to publishers at the end of 2020, start of 2021. So that was a good, 3.5 year process. And I thought my job was done when I submitted it to the publishers. It's my first book, and I realised we were really just getting started. So it was a long project.
And how easy was it to get a publisher who was interested in Sri Lankan cricket, or who felt there was potential in your book?
I have to say I was incredibly fortunate. I met a cricket writer from the UK here, Tim Wigmore, who was just here touring with the England team, and he put me in touch with his agent in India, Kanishka Gupta, who's here this weekend. He's absolutely wonderful agent and a wonderful human being. And he instantly took to the book, although he hates cricket. He something in it he liked, and it was fantastic. I went from being an unknown writer, not knowing how I was going to get this published, and then within a couple of weeks, Kanishka had garnered several offers for the book, even while I was still working on the manuscript. So that was, I mean,
Extremely lucky, like
an
you
incredible
said.
piece of serendipity, which I mean seems to abound in Sri Lanka. And once I had that deal struck for the Asian rights, that was kind of a springboard for me, and then I pitched to some smaller publishers in the UK and managed to sort that out, and hopefully we'll have a singular version coming in 2024. Touch wood.
And a Tamil version later on, I hope?
I hope so too, Penguin do have the Tamil rights, and so I would love it to be in singular and Tamil, and if there's the appetite in Hindi too.
Yes. Growing up as a child, who were your literary influences?
Oh God, I mean they're so broad and diverse. I actually just met Anthony Horowitz yesterday, and I said to him, I loved the Alex Rider books growing up. I can still remember getting them in the palm of my hand. But I mean, I always was with books from the very first days, the famous five I loved when I was very young, Roald Dahl, all the kind of classic children books. And then in my teenage years, I suppose I moved into more literary fiction. I was a huge fan of Ian McEwan when I was growing up, Sebastian Faulks, so I'm very fortunate to be interviewing on Sunday, which is a huge privilege. But I read far and wide, and then I went on to study English at university, and that was great. I got to encounter all kinds of writers that I never would have introduced myself to. And then, it was only relatively recently that I got into reading sports books. I always, I'm one of these people who gets the newspaper and turns it over to the back page straight away. And there's always cricket on the background. But I always thought the idea of books about sport were maybe a little bit dry, a little bit, and it was only when I started to read them that I understood how they could be about so much more than sport. They could be about politics and culture and life, and especially stories about human beings. And I think that sports books to be successful and to be readable have to have that sense of soul, and I hope that I've managed to achieve that partially in the 9 level.
And are you working on any current new material at the moment?
I'm still just bouncing ideas around,
Right.
And I've just kind of struck on an idea for a next project. It's very early stages, and I'm not quite sure what form it's going to take, whether it's a book or whether it's a podcast. But I'm excited to get stuck into it.
Okay, so tell me about your podcast you do with our mutual friend Mark Machado. Tell me about that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tina, for giving me the chance to plug it. It's called The Murali End, and it is a weekly podcast about Sri Lankan cricket. So it's our reaction and analysis to everything that's going on. We also put out a weekly newsletter, which you can subscribe to. It comes straight into your inbox. I just finished my piece for it this morning at the hotel about how Sri Lankan players are doing in the franchise leagues. But we try and... It's funny because there's so much cricket journalism around. There are hundreds and hundreds of cricket podcasts, but very few dealing with Sri Lanka. You can find masses on England. Yet the passion for the game that I find in Sri Lanka, I mean, England can't compete with it. So it seems skewed in terms of how the media works to where the interest is. And so we're trying to do a little something to right that a bit. And we have interviews. So just this week we had Prabnavaratnam, who was formerly an analyst with SLC, and he now works with one of the LPL sides. We had Anton Ruon a few weeks back as the fielding coach. So we've been going purely focused on Sri Lanka for about just over 6 months, and just keeping on building and building, and we hope to last for a long time. It would be the #1 Sri Lankan cricket podcast.
Now, Sri Lankan girls are doing quite well in cricket.
They're doing fantastically.
Yeah, but why do you think there's such a disparity between the men's cricket and the women's cricket? What can we do to address that issue?
It's strange because I've always felt,
I feel there's a lot of gender inequality there, from the treatment and attention they get to, I believe, the pay as well.
Absolutely, and I think there's a huge amount of, you know better than I do, I think there's a huge amount of gender inequality in all facets of Sri Lankan life, which, I mean, it's always strange because, you say to people Sri Lanka and they say the first female prime minister in the world. And then I think that in many areas, women are still lacking the autonomy which they so clearly need. I think is it still illegal for women to purchase liquor in a store, for example, which I mean is just crazy, right? And I think with cricket, there's been that sense that it's a man's game, and I think even to the extent that certain parents didn't want their daughters to play cricket because they felt it was unladylike. And I think that the only way that can change is just through exposure. And I mean, the way the women won in England this summer was just fantastic. It's such a springboard, and to see Chamari be voted the Women's ODI Player of the Year, I mean, that's all just fantastic. And I think that women's cricket is finally starting to get the respect it deserves, because there's been a real revolution in the past 2 years in England in terms of women's cricket. But before that, I never really met women in England who were particularly interested in cricket. Whereas Sri Lanka, I've met so many women who are knowledgeable, can speak about the game with real erudition and love the game. So Sri Lanka has something there that it can capture and harness. And I think that's starting to happen. I think that SLC is finally giving it the attention and the respect it deserves. They've got some good coaches in place. They've got, I think Rumesh Ratnayaka is still the head coach, who's a fantastic guy, a very experienced coach, and so I really do see Sri Lankan women's cricket going from strength to strength, and I think in the next 3 to 4 years we're going to see Sri Lanka challenging the big teams, England, Australia, really regularly.
That's good. I hope things like your podcast will address these issues and push them into the
absolutely.
forefront as
We're
well.
doing what we can to promote women's cricket, and we cover all the series. And I mean, I found it so inspiring to see the girls come to England and do as well as they did. And I think the sense had been for a long time that it was a one-woman team, that it was Chamari and then 10 faceless girls. And I think that's really not the case anymore. And there's a great blend of youth and experience. It was wonderful to see some players kind of fresh out of school coming and thriving on that stage. And I really see that series as a springboard. And I think that 2024 is going to be a good year for Sri Lanka women's cricket.
Excellent. Okay, so that's our session with you done. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much.
And I hope you have a wonderful festival.
Likewise, and I hope we can catch up again soon.
Yes.
Oh, thank you so much.